Welcome to Hello Grow
The number one growth podcast in the world.
in the world. Today we have Reid Hiatt, and he's a man that needs no introduction, but for those of you who do not know who he is, I will give a quick, brief introduction of Reid. Reid and I have known each other since college. He transferred from our little hole-in-the-wall college in Idaho to a real school in Utah. You went to BYU. You got your undergrad, well, you combined to get your master's in accounting and your undergrad at the same time. Graduated from BYU, went on to get your CPA, worked for Deloitte in New York, and you left Deloitte to go to work for a boutique management consulting firm called Arate, and you left that and founded Tactic, which is where you're at right now as the CEO. He has two beautiful children, beautiful wife. He's a great golfer and wicked smart and a great friend. Great to have you on the podcast, Reid.
Thank you so much. And Cor, I'm impressed that you know that much about me, to be honest.
There's a lot more.
And you even pronounced everything right, which is impressive. So, no, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So I want to dive right into the jugular, which is what everyone, I think, wants to hear. You have this successful company. You guys have some big brand name logo clients. I don't know if I'm allowed to say on the podcast, but anyone listening would be extremely impressed of knowing that, like, oh, I'm associating with these brands every day and they're clients of Tactic. What have been, I describe them as fetal moments, fetal position in the shower moments. And can we just jump right into those? What have been a couple of those through your journey to get to this point?
Yeah, you're not joking. You're jumping right into it with that kind of a question. So, no, absolutely. Great question. And there have been, unfortunately, plenty of those fetal moments. In fact, probably the most recent one was a month and a half ago. So, for those that don't know, Tactic, three co-founders, myself and two others, Chris and Austin. Chris is still here, but about a month and a half ago, in talking with Austin, Austin decided to transition off of Tactic, and kind of came as a surprise. But we're a software company, early stage, and Austin was our technical co-founder, so pretty necessary. And Chris and I, we don't have that background, that knowledge. And it was about mid-December, and there was about a week where we had no technical co-founder, we didn't have a technical leader in the business, and we didn't know what we were going to do. And I would say that was absolutely one of the more fetal-like moments that we've had. But I mean, that's just the most recent one that's come to mind. I would say, I mean, at this point, it's kind of quarterly, it's where you have those. But what I found is that as you go through fetal moments, what's been important for me to recognize that I don't think I knew, especially the first year or so of doing Tactic, is that they're normal. I think one thing that's hard is when you're experiencing something that makes you kind of break down and makes you question things. It's so personal. It feels like it's unique to you. And while the circumstances are unique to you, at least I have a hard time finding successful people that I look up to that haven't been through things that are similar. And so I actually think going through those types of moments can put you in the category of some of the people that are most successful in this world. And really, it's does it break you or does it shape you? And I think that's what matters the most. So what I try to tell myself is when I go through these moments, it's, hey, all of the success, this is a rite of passage, to become the type of people that I want to become like. And so I try to lean into that, but it still is hard. But that perspective has helped me kind of just grit through. So
I love that. You said they either break you or shape you, right? In your entrepreneurial journey, can you tell us about a couple that really shaped Reid?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the very at the very beginning, Tactic was just an idea. So for those that don't know, Tactic, it's a workplace management company. We have software that helps facilitate hybrid work. And the idea was born out of the pandemic. So I was not in software. Didn't plan to be. I was very happy at RTA Capital Partners. I thought that was going to be my career. And the pandemic happened, and I was talking with Chris, actually. And Chris's background is sales. And it was about a month after the shutdown happened. I remember it as when the NBA shut down, because I'm a big NBA fan. And I was like, oh, my goodness, the NBA's, they stopped. This is serious. But it was April of 2020 when I got a call from Chris. And Chris and I started talking, and we realized that we felt like corporate real estate, commercial real estate was going to be important long term, but that it was going to be used very differently by companies post-pandemic. That was like the big assumption that kind of started the idea for Tactic. And so I wasn't involved in software. I this was kind of a new world to me, and I kept looking for reasons why not to do it. I was like, okay, like, somebody else is going to do this first or do it better, but things just kind of kept happening over the next 12 months or so. And I didn't want to raise money, but the first moment where I felt like it became very, very serious was when we decided we launched our MVP. So like the minimum viable product, like the basic version of the platform, the same day. It was March 15th, 2021. And it was the same day that we also onboarded our first paying customer. It was a customer out of New York, 1010 Data. They were awesome. We worked with Maria Alvarado. She's phenomenal. It was only $1,200, most life-changing $1,200 I've ever made. But it was right at that point in time where I realized we were all working day jobs. Tactic was just nights and weekends. And I realized, okay, if I had been historically against raising money, I was just kind of, let's just grow this organically, bootstrap it. And if it turns into something, then great. But it was that first day that we had customers using the platform that I realized, I can't continue to work like my day job and then just support this customer at night or on the weekends, right? We couldn't. So we decided to raise money. And I would say it was that point where we decided to raise money and raise money from friends and family. A lot of them were, people that I know very closely, that I kind of got put in a situation where, or put myself in a situation where this has to work, right? So it kind of created the circumstance where I would feel enough to be in a fetal position, because like now I was fine losing my money, but I was not fine losing other people's money. And so I think that's like for me, like there were hard things that happened leading up that 12 months, but it really wasn't until I took outside investment from other people that I felt the pressure that would make me feel some of those things during certain circumstances where like I couldn't give up. Giving up wasn't an option, but still having to find a solution, even though you didn't really know what that would be. And so I feel like that was raising money for me was kind of what created the environment where I could get put in a fetal position with regards to tactics specifically. And I think the first truly fetal position that I experienced was we launched our MVP in March 2021. We raised friends and family money. We raised just under $500,000 initially. We then went on later that year to raise a seed, but just initially just under $500,000 from friends and family in May of 2021. And we were growing. It was awesome. I think in July of 2021, we'd only been in business with this very basic version of the product. We had closed just in July alone. We just closed like another $40,000 in new revenue, and our pipeline was ballooning. And the Delta variant hit. So for those that don't remember, the Delta variant, COVID was still very much an unknown. And so people were starting to go back into the office in like May, June, July, and then the Delta variant hit, and it completely wiped out everybody's return to office plans, which simultaneously wiped out our entire pipeline. And we just closed money from people that were friends of mine, family, right? And I felt responsibility to, return their money, and then, let alone like a profit on top of that. And our entire pipeline got completely wiped out. And it stayed wiped out probably for about 6 months. And that was probably the first one. So I would say the most recent one was when our technical co-founder left a month and a half ago. And the first time I really felt like that fetal moment was a couple months after raising our first round of funding. So,
bro, I've had so much respect for you since going through a family and friends round and then attempting to raise capital on the SaaS company that I tried to start 8 months ago. and was successful and raised and got commitment of around the same $500,000 mark. And the new added weight, I had no idea like how much pressure that was going to add to me, because it was one thing to put myself through it. It was one thing to put my wife and our kids through it and say, yeah, we can go sell our house and take that money and go and live in an apartment and like be fine and all of those things. But like that weight, I don't know if anyone understands it without having done it. And I only dipped my toe in it, and you've been fully immersed in it. So my hat's off to you. I think
Thank
one
you.
of the things I've forgotten and you reminded me of is one of the reasons I started Aspen was because who I wanted to become. And I think often people want to be the person that they respect, but they get into the mix and they say, how do I get a profit? How do I grow this? How do I take care of all the stakeholders? And they forget that this is the journey that they chose because of the end result of who they want to become. And if somebody just came and said, here's your ICP, here's your roadmap, and here's your $10 million, $200 million take home that you're going to get at the end of this without the becoming, it would just be robbery. Like, because you get the rewards, but you actually miss out on the most critical reward, which is becoming the most satisfying reward and knowing that you're the person that could do it again, not just the person that got the result. I'm curious, so entrepreneurs and sales growth leaders are the ones that listen to this podcast. I'm curious if you can talk through the decision-making process that you went through and that you would suggest other people go through as they're anticipating that they might need to raise capital, both kind of like this vanity dark side of, well, it's going to be super validating, and also actual necessity of raising capital. And I know some of it's probably confidential, so you don't need to go into that, but as much as you can share, and I know that you've done multiple rounds, so like, can you just start from the beginning and tell us what to do?
So great question. I actually think somebody else on your podcast talked about this, and I saw that clip, and it's fundraising is largely about the ability to tell a story. I think that it's slightly inversely related with not completely. Fundraising or storytelling is always, I think, a critical factor, but it's slightly inversely related with how successful the company is and like how far along they are in their journey, right? So, if you have no money, no revenue, no customers, it's just an idea. Storytelling is like absolutely critical. Like, you're not going to be able to raise money without being able to clearly articulate the story, the reason, what your go-to-market strategy looks like in a compelling way to investors. And then likewise, if you're growth stage company and you're raising money, storytelling is still important. They still want to know what you're going to do with that money, but there's a track record there where they can see, okay, you've grown, triple, double, right? Revenue's grown 3 times, twice, year over year for the first 5 years. That's you're in a class of your own, right? And so I think it's always important, and that's where I would say to start is I've read books. I'm still not as good of a storyteller as I would like to be, but I've really it's interesting. The books I've read are a lot different than I thought I would when I realized storytelling was a muscle I needed to strengthen. And the different TED Talks, there's things that you can do, but that is a muscle that's absolutely critical. And so I agree with, the guest that you had on that talked about that. In terms of fundraising itself, fundraising doesn't really happen by accident. So I hear a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm just kind of testing the water. And investors, I don't mean this badly, but investors are kind of motivated a little bit by greed. So you have to create like a scarcity element if you want somebody to invest, because as an investor, especially the earlier stage company, it's risky. It's just, it's most risky the earlier it's more risky the earlier the company is. And so if you're kind of like, oh, I'm just kind of raising money, and you don't create a sense of urgency, nobody wants to be the first necessarily to always write a check. And so they're just going to kind of wait, and the longer they wait, the more they're going to be able to validate, hey, is this company actually going to grow? Even at early stages, even like, did they do what they said they were going to do last month or a quarter ago? And so I think the second thing that I would say is if you're going to fundraise, do it, commit to it, and then find a way to create urgency so that investors feel that they're going to miss out on, like, use FOMO essentially, create the feeling that, an investor will miss out if they don't act. So, some good advice I've received from a board member of ours is, basically be like, hey, explain, like, we're over the next 45 days, we're going to be, raising this round. These are the terms. We're talking with a number of customers. The kind of deadline to be part of this is this date, and create some sense of like arbitrary deadline, but don't let them know it's arbitrary, so that they're willing to commit in or out. I find that the biggest waste of time is the ones that it's better to be told no, because then you don't have to waste any more time. I think the mistake I made initially was I was afraid that they would say no. So I wanted them to continue to kind of be maybe open-minded, or me perceive that they were open-minded, and I ended up wasting time. And the reality is getting the answer no is way more helpful than getting the answer maybe I'll think about it. Because maybe I'll think about it requires you to still continue to spend more time. It's much better if you can just force somebody to give you a yes or no answer. So
that's very interesting. I backtracking to a little bit before you raised and you put the deck and you went to raise money. You said that you were a little hesitant to raise, right? You didn't want to. What made you change your mind?
Yeah, great question. I'm fine losing my money, but it's when other people have money in that I'm not okay losing their money. So it was a hard decision for me to do it. It wasn't until I had to, essentially, I could no longer not if I wanted to do tactic. But what changed was having customers. Once we had customers on the platform, we didn't have a support team. Nobody was full time. I had an obligation to my employer to work, full time for them, and people were using our platform during the day, and I couldn't fulfill both of those obligations. So that was for me the time where, like, I probably waited maybe even a little bit too long, but that was the point where, even as somebody that was very conservative and didn't want to raise money, I said, okay, no, if I'm going to do this, like, I have to do this. And the only way to do that was to raise money for us.
I don't think people realize, so Reid and I, with our wives and our Hudson and Henry, are like the same age. Yeah. So they're both 8 months, 9 months, a year old. They're probably about a year old. We all went down to Newport together and had a little Marriott like timeshare. It was awesome. It was the best. But I don't think they realized, like, so we're working all day together. Like, I have my startups a couple of years further along than we had started in 2017, and you're starting Tactic. But I think you just wrapped up with Arate. Yep. Or still working with them. But you would be on calls until like 3 a.m. And then I don't know if you...
I do remember that,
like,
yeah.
The scar tissue that this probably created. And then you would sleep for like an hour and a half. And then you'd wake, because I was like, I'm done at like 9:30. I'm early to bed, but I'm usually up at 5. And so I get up at 5 and you'd be up. And I was like, dude, when did you, like, are you kidding me? You're still up? You're like, no, dude, I'm good. I got sleep from 3 to 5. Like, I don't feel like people talk about that side of it, of what it takes to early on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
The inertia that's necessary to leave gravity's pull.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a very busy week. That was actually the week you're referring to, is actually the week that we were onboarding our second customer ever. We were actually having login issues. So people were having issues logging into the software. And that customer was overseas. So it was a very busy week. But for me, I mean, it kind of goes a little bit back to fundraising and why I actually think it's more important. I think it's important for the capital aspect. You have to, like, we couldn't allocate the time that we needed to without being able to have that be our source of income personally. But it was also the level of commitment that it forced me to commit to Tactic. Again, I felt okay losing my money, but I wasn't okay losing somebody else's money. And so when we raised that money, it was kind of like okay, I'm committed to this for good or for bad. I'm committed to Tactic. And if there's a call, overseas with a company in Turkey and it's at 3 a.m., like we'll work nights. And so I do think it was helpful. Like, raising money was helpful for multiple reasons. I mean, there's more reasons I can go into, but for us, and I don't think it's necessarily the right answer for every company in every stage, but for us, it was good. And for me personally, it was good because it forced me to commit to that level. But I think one of the superpowers of an entrepreneur is that everything seems like it's going to be easier than in reality it will be. Truly. I think that is a superpower. Because I think that if they understood more how hard it was going to be, they would start a lot less companies. But by the time they realize that, they're already committed, you know, and committed to seeing it through. And so, so that's kind of my 2 cents on just the grind aspect of starting a company. The reality is that people like see you change your LinkedIn and they're like, oh my gosh, that looks amazing. You just raised money. That's so cool. And it's really not that cool. It's actually like, it's just essentially what you've done is you've just taken on like the biggest challenge you'll probably ever take on. And you are the safety net. There's nothing behind, there's nobody below you. Like you have to, you know, if somebody gets sick, like it doesn't matter if you're sick, you have to get on, right? Like you are the safety net. So I don't know if I answered the question correctly or right, or even if it was the right question, but I think that, you know, for me, again, it's a little bit tied together. Fundraising was really important because it forced me to commit at the level that I was unwilling to not do those things.
You reminded me of one of our first interactions, Court. I think I was 21 at the time. First time we ever sat down for lunch, you know. And then at that time, I was about to be done with my 2-year associate degree at LDS Business College, and I'm thinking about going back to Brazil and starting my own business. And then Court and I go to lunch, and then he says, "Well, it's going to be 10 times harder than you think." So I was like, "Oh, thanks." That's very
you knew.
But it is a reality, right? You said that it's not for every company to raise money, right? For people that are listening and they're thinking right now, they're in that stage, should I raise, should I not? What do you think are some of the reasons why they shouldn't?
That's a great question. I really think it comes down to validation. So like, you know, software, that's kind of what I know. So software, talk a lot about product market fit, right? And product market fit, I think we think of it as like black and white. It's like, oh, you either have it or you don't. It's really a spectrum. Like there's different levels to it, right? But there is a certain amount of product market fit that you need to have to make it an even like a viable idea. And so for us, I didn't have it like, you know, Chris, myself, Austin, we didn't necessarily have a ton of personal capital. You know, we were younger and anyway, a ton of personal capital to really just launch this and not need funding at some point to take it to the next level. But we had enough that we were able to validate. We were able to essentially sell. What we did is we got on Upwork, freelance site, found a designer. Chris, Austin, myself, we sat down, we whiteboarded out like kind of mock-ups of what we thought our product should look like and what it should do. Sent those to a designer and like, I can't remember where, but it was just, you know, really affordable, and got the designs. And then I took those designs and used a prototyping software to prototype out. So like it was no code. It was just, you click on the screen and it would, you know, look like it was working, give the impression that it was working. And we just went and sold that. And got feedback from people that we thought would be like our ideal customers. And even after that, like even after we got like a lot of really positive feedback, for me, I was still like, we're not quite there. Like, let's see what we can build just on our nights and weekends. You know, Austin was leading the charge there. And it wasn't until somebody actually truly did pull out a credit card and pay for it that it was like, okay, like we should go raise money now. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, it's such a personal decision about whether or not you need to raise capital. I think that I think there's a certain amount of validation that you should try to do before you raise money if you can. If that's I don't, you know, every company is different, but there should be things that you can do to validate it without needing to necessarily invest a ton of money into it. And, you know, you can create wait lists and other things, try and kind of replicate what you would consider somebody actually purchasing the software would look like. But I think if it's like, hey, I have this really cool idea, I want to go build it. Like, I need to go get money to build it. Like, I don't think that you've really thought through, because the reality is once you raise money, things do become more challenging. You have board meetings. You have to, you have to report. There's time invested into things that you don't necessarily have to. And so when you're really early stage and you're trying to iterate and you're trying to figure out exactly what the first version of the product looks like, and you're trying to understand what the customer's needs are in the market and how to position the product, etc. In my opinion, I think that there's a lot you can do with very little money that's worth doing, because it will make you even more. It will make your story that much more compelling when you do go to raise money. Because you'll have that confidence of like, I know exactly these people's I can speak to this from the perspective of our future customers. I understand intimately the problem that we're solving. I know exactly, there's going to be things you don't know, but you can speak to them as if they're facts, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have that level of confidence. And so again, I don't want to tell anybody when they should or shouldn't raise money. I think it's a very personal decision. And for us, it was what was needed. But I think that I don't think just because you have an idea, you should just be like, oh, next stage, raise money, Yeah,
so. I like that. Can I ask a question about, you've mentioned your partners a couple times.
Yeah.
A few times so far. For people who are listening, what should they look for in a partner?
That's a good question. My dad told me growing up the most important business decision I would ever make would be who I partner with, and I think that is probably one of the most true statements I've ever heard. Who you partner with 100% is gonna be more impactful on the success of the company that you're starting more than like any other decision you're going to make. So definitely think it's not something that you do just on a whim. I also think that that's part of the reason why it's helpful to not just raise money immediately together. Like Chris, Austin, and myself, we'd been working together for, I think, a year about before we had ever raised money. Most of that time we hadn't even established like the actual legal entity. So like by the time we raised money, we all knew each other very, very well. Like we weren't just friends, like we knew each other in a working environment. And I think that's just super important is to try and like, if you're just friends with somebody, like I told Chris and Austin, when we were forming Tactic, I said, guys, like no matter how successful Tactic is, if we're not all friends at the end of this, then it was a failure. Like that's what I told Chris and Austin. We obviously now have fiduciary responsibilities to the business, but the way that I viewed my relationships with them is like they're close friends of mine. Even Austin, now that he's transitioned, is still a close friend of mine. And I wanted to make sure that, hey, like, at the end of the day, now that we've raised money, we do have a fiduciary responsibility to the business, but that doesn't, like, I want to have a certain type of relationship, with your partners. And so, I think you need to, Chris is a great example of this. Chris and I think we've been friends since high school. We think totally differently. And we can have super brash conversations with one another. Chris can tell me, hey, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I take zero offense to it, because I've also told him, like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, right? Like, that is how our relationship is. And the reality is a lot of my ideas are stupid, right? And I need somebody that's just going to tell me it's stupid. So I think if you're looking for a partner, one, I would say, having a professional relationship is very different than having a like just being friends. So make sure, if you can, make sure you feel good about like that those two relationships are separate. The second thing is make sure, that the person you're partnering with, that you are able to have constructive conversations. Like you're able to disagree. Mm-hmm. You agree or disagree, you're able to move forward united. Like I think that's important. And so again, and then more practically, I just think having the skill sets, right? Just because you were talking with a friend and it was together that you came up with the conversation, like Chris's background is sales, mine's accounting and finance. Like we have unique practical backgrounds that help us grow. Austin's was technical. So we each had, practical backgrounds that we could apply separately. They were diverse from one another. That's allowed us to grow the company in ways that we wouldn't have been able to if we were all concentrated in one area.
I think sometimes people go through this idea of, I'm going to start a company, I'm going to get partners, and we're going to go do it. And they force this idea of the partnership and the business idea. And it worked out for Chris. It worked out for you. It worked out for Austin, that your guys' lives lined up to leave your jobs and go do this. And it worked out with COVID and the economics and the idea. And I think people oftentimes say, I'm going to force this, we're going to go do this. But I think a more wise approach is putting feelers out there, knowing I want this to be the end goal, and then allowing some of those things to come into their life that are going to facilitate that type of success that they're hoping to get, rather than I have to do this and I have to force it right now, which is extremely difficult for entrepreneurially minded people because we're all so impatient. Like we want to we want 5 demos closed by the end of today. Like you're telling me to wait like maybe a year. Maybe
Perception
2
is
years.
that entrepreneurs and think it's easier than it is, right? They think it's going to happen faster than it's probably going to. Like that's a superpower.
Yeah. I wrote that quote down. That's funny that you shared it. We are here because we are not here because it was easy. We are here because we thought it would be.
I thought that was so funny when I saw that. Yeah, it was. I saw, for those that don't know, I saw a quote on we work in a co-working space, and I saw a quote on one of the company's whiteboards, and it said, "We're not here because because it's easy. We're here because we thought it would be easy." And I'm like, it's funny, but it's like, yeah, it's kind of true.
You said something at lunch before this about grit, and I honestly don't think people, first of all, they can't understand truly what it took unless they're in your shoes. But even in this conversation, it's so difficult to portray what you're going through. And like Riley's been able to see it up close. Your partners have been able to see it up close. I feel like we're really close friends, and I get to see only glimpses. I just get to see the look in your eye when we're hanging out and our kids are playing, and it's like, today was a really tough day, or this quarter was a really tough quarter, or this year has just been brutal and butt kicking. You made a comment at lunch, and I'm curious if I gathered what you meant by it, but the ability to cultivate grit, and I'm curious if grit is something someone's born with or something that can be cultivated.
So I have no empirical evidence. There's been studies on grit and things. I have no empirical evidence. I'm sure that there's studies, that actually have like empirical evidence to support what they're saying. But what I would consider grit, I think grit is probably like the number one most important characteristic, not just of a founder, of like a successful person. I saw, the reason why I think is that I've learned that the harder something is, the less competition I'm going to have, right? So and it's the grit factor, right? So, and this is kind of just the perspective that I've tried to shift to, but like there were times where I was going through something that was so hard. Like we were trying to build a piece of the technology of the platform that was just so challenging, or set up, a automation on the sales or the marketing side that was just, we couldn't quite nail down. It was just so hard. And I'm like, I would get frustrated, but then I was like, well, it's actually really good that this is super hard, because 99% of the competition are going to quit before they actually figure this out. So all we have to do is just persevere, have grit, and we're already ahead of 99% of the other people. All we have to do is take the call at 3 a.m. because, the other 4 out of 5 people that are on this deal, they're probably not going to do that, So I've kind of seen again, whether it's true or not, this is just how I've kind of shifted my thinking, is the harder something is, the less the more you can differentiate and set yourself apart from everybody else, right? And that goes to kind of grit, right? So, there's, again, grit is a spectrum, right? I think everybody has like some level of grit. I think grit is totally formed by, different experiences that you have, right? The greatest generation, and the things that they went through at an early age and how that shaped them, just like an entire generation, right? So, but it is a mindset. I found that, grit is very largely correlated. I mean, you can have grit in different areas of your life. I think it's largely correlated with like where you're passionate. So like the more passionate you are about something, the more likely you are to grit through the hard things if you really believe and you feel really passionate about. And so, I think it's absolutely characteristic, and you just kind of have it naturally. But, I also think that there's things that you can do to increase your tolerance for, I don't want to say pain, but, challenges, and persevere through. And so, for me, again, one thing that helped me be extra gritty was raising money because I had other people's expectations. And so I was like, all right, well, there's no quit now, right? And I'm going to grit through this. I don't know. If I hadn't raised money, would I have done all the things that I've done to get to, this point and hopefully where we're going? Maybe not, right? And so I think that there's things that you can do, circumstances you can set up in your life to make you be more willing to grit through hard things.
You said something to me. You probably don't know. You'll remember when I bring it up. But we were at a pivotal point in Aspen, and it was right about the time that you transitioned from like employee to partner for me, and really like, no, you weren't there day one, but like co-founder of Aspen. And it was at a time where I was like, okay, I don't know if this is ever going to turn into what I thought this was going to turn into. And I think that I generally lived next to the well of optimism, and I think you both reside there as well. But I think I kind of lost that. Like the well had dried up. I didn't want to necessarily do it anymore. Didn't know if it was going to turn into what I thought it was going to turn into. It wasn't as big as I thought it was going to be. And we were hanging out, and you were pretty pumped that night, and you just said, dude, I always tell my team, it's not if, it's when. And that mindset, like it shifted something in me. I was like, oh, it's not a question if this is going to work out. It's a matter of when it's going to work out. And that mindset, like I think if anyone applies that, then they can start having these massive rewards in their life, because it's going to get them to get up one more time and one more time and one more time when the whole rest of the herd in the competition has quit. So they have a higher likelihood to get it, like you were saying, and the reward that they get, because there's so many less people there, is so much more significant.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for reminding me about that. Yeah, that was what I classified 2022. I had to tell myself 2022, if not, it's when, not if.
Talk to us about the decision to leave Deloitte. So you went through a really intense undergrad and graduate program. The CPA is not an easy exam. That was really tough. And you decided to maybe leaving Deloitte and leaving Arte had like similar frameworks of why you left to move on to the next thing. But can you talk about both of those a little bit?
I can be brief. So Deloitte, I love Deloitte. I love all the people I worked with. I thought it was awesome. I studied accounting, but I knew I didn't want to be an accountant. Why did you study it? Because I wanted to be in business, and I felt like I didn't know what I wanted to do yet, but I felt that accounting would teach me. It's like kind of like people say it's the language of business. It's the ability just to kind of look at like numbers and be able to understand that business story and be able to start, identifying solutions, etc. And when I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So BYU's accounting program, they do a great job at, lining kind of jobs up for you. And so I had a mentor of mine that really strongly encouraged me to, wherever I chose to take a job, like take it in like a big city, because the experiences that you're going to get there are going to be just, it's not going to be the same as if you go back to like Phoenix, for example. And I love Phoenix, but just like New York, the experience I get in a Phoenix office versus a New York office would be very different. And so, I said, the way in my mind when I was graduating, I decided that I was going to get my CPA, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was like, you have to get 2,000 hours. So I'm like, I'm going to get my 2,000 hours, take the exams, get my CPA, and then hopefully things kind of start to clear up. And I have a better idea of what I want to do after I've been in the workforce for a little bit. And loved my time there. But COVID hit. I was working at Deloitte. COVID hit. The MBA, the shutdown happened mid-March of 2020. And our oldest son was born 2 weeks after that. And so Riley and I, we were in a small apartment in New York. And I actually remember on the subway home, I got like the news popped up that everything was getting shut down basically. And then I got an email from like the partners at the New York office that they were shutting down the offices there. And so and I saw an article that said that they were potentially going to start throwing tents up in Central Park because they were worried that the hospitals were going to get so overloaded that they were going to have to help people treat people there. And I'm like, I got home and I said, Riley, as cool as it would be to have our baby in a tent in Central Park, like I think we should go back to Arizona. And so that's what we did. We flew back to Arizona 2 weeks before Hudson was born, and had the baby there. And it was right around that time that another mentor of mine reached out. He was starting this. He was a very successful man. Respected him a ton. He was starting another company called Arate Capital Partners. It was essentially providing consulting services for highly distressed companies. And there's some other things that they do that are really cool. But I'm like, hey, if there's a wagon, if I can hitch myself to them, like that's the guy I want to hitch myself to. And so that's what I did. And for good or for bad, it happened to coincide with the conversation that I referenced with Chris, where we started having the idea of, what does commercial real estate look like post-COVID? And so I transitioned to Arate, and I was fully committed, and I worked full time there up until I left. But the whole time that I was working there, like nights and weekends, to some extent, I was working on Tactic. And again, I loved my time at Arate. I kept looking for reasons why Tactic wasn't going to work out. But it just, again, and that doesn't mean there's not hard things that have happened, but like it just, like the things that I thought were going to be blockers just kind of like weren't blockers. And so again, eventually, once we had that first customer, I'm like, all right, I have to choose. I've been waiting for something to stop me. Nothing has. And as I loved working for Grant and for Sean, but at Arate, and I just looked and I said, when I die, am I going to, will I, if depending on what happens with Tactic, I'm going to give, and would I regret not giving this a shot? And I just kind of came to the conclusion of like, yeah, like no matter how Tactic turns out, I think for the rest of my life, if I don't do this, I'll always wonder what if. And that was kind of what pushed me.
I have a question for both of you guys, because we've been talking about grit. Both of those were pivots, and someone could look at and say, well, you should have been more gritty. You should have had your baby in a tent. That would have been extra gritty, like gold star for you. Yeah. And we've all had times where we've pivoted and where we've persevered. And I'm curious, as you've gone after new markets, how do you make this decision of, we just haven't had enough demos, or maybe there is some gold, we just need to drill down deeper or keep mining and we're going to get to it, versus we need to pivot and go into a new market? And similar with you, of leaving career decisions and then also finding product market, the nuance there of more product market fit along your way and pivots versus persevering.
I want to hear Reid's
I want to hear yours.
Because I literally wrote down, how do I, stubbornness versus grit, how do I know? I literally was going to ask you guys the exact same question. So
Core beat you to it.
Did you see my notes? Reid, I want to hear your answer.
All right. I feel like I've been talking a lot. So I'm sorry. I'll truly actually try this time to be brief. It's what are you like? It's there's just gritty for grit's sake, and like being gritty strategically. That's how I see it. So taking the New York example, you could have just been gritted it out and had a baby in Central. What would that have, would that have moved me closer to my goals or what I was trying to work towards? No, I couldn't go work from the office. There was no, I couldn't rationalize a really productive reason how staying there would have moved me closer to my goals. So, I think in fact, I would actually argue that sometimes you have to almost pull yourself out of I'm just going to be gritty for grit's sake, and ask yourself, am I thinking about this? Am I going about this the right way? Am I grinding just to grind, or am I, work harder versus work smarter? Am I working smarter, or am I just working really, really hard? And so I do have that problem. I'm not going to lie. I'm a grinder. So just naturally my default is I will grind. But sometimes I grind unnecessarily. And it's if I would pull myself out and just look more strategically at the situation, I would find that, I'm still committed to this goal, but I should be doing this differently and it would be way more effective. Right. So I'm curious to hear your answer, but I think it's important. The grit is moving you towards what you're after,
Yeah. I don't know if my answer is going to be as good as yours, but I think it's the why. So two things came to mind when you asked that question, Kurt. So first one was, and I've shared this experience with you, when I was about 2 days after I got married, my father-in-law told me this. He said, just make sure that you're not committed to a mistake. And the context that he said that was
that was 2 days after you got married.
Yeah. It was not. It was not related to my. It was not related to my wife. So it was more like we were planning on coming to the U.S. and we were about to jump on a plane 2 days later, and then he just said, just make sure that you're not committed to a mistake. What he meant is, if you've made a decision, just don't stay on that decision because of pride, because you've decided to do something and now you can't go back to it. So I guess ever since he told me that has been, I always ask myself that question, like, why am I doing this? Am I just trying to prove something, that because I made a decision and now I need to prove that I'm right, or does it actually serve a purpose? So I guess that's the biggest thing for me. It's just asking, and I know it's very theoretical, but it's just, am I doing this out of trying to prove that I'm right and ego, or actually I see, like, my gut tells me that this is actually the right path to go. And then the second experience that it reminded me of is 2 months ago, we decided to add a new line of business to Aspen. And we put together, a simple playbook. We tested. And then one of our SDRs came to me and said, we're not getting any traction. It's bad. Like, we're scheduling all these meetings. People are not interested. But my gut told me, and from the conversations I had with people, there was a fit. We were just not, talking to the right people yet. So we changed again the ICP, started talking to different people, started gaining a little bit of traction. Then we minimize. So, okay, we talked to 10 people. These are the 2 that we actually liked what we said. Okay, what's common between the 2 of them? And then, okay, now we build an ICP around those 2 people. And then we just, ever since we made that decision, we've been having, I think we've had close to 50 demos now.
That's awesome.
And it's been huge, like a huge success.
That's
very,
awesome.
very early. So second answer would be gut. I think there's there's, if you're aligned with, if you respect your own gut, you know.
Yeah.
Taking both of what you guys said. So first, Reid, gritty for the sake of gritty is insanity. It's what's the desired result, what's necessary for me to get there, and whatever the obstacle is, I'm going to be on the call at 3 in the morning. But just to be gritty does not make sense unless it's pushing you towards that goal. And then what you said, Carlos, is this idea of intuitively strategic and then listening to your gut. And I think the reason that sales are so necessary, especially in early stage companies, is because you need enough reps to prove the assumptions. You need a big enough data set to have enough information to say, yeah, we're on the right path, or we're not on the right path, and we need to pivot or change. And so the ability to tell the story or sell, I think it can't be overstated early on.
And I know you're not talking directly about that, but I do think for early founders and for startups, never have, my suggestion or something that I've learned is to never have only one person selling a particular product, because you will never know if it's the person or the process or the playbook. So always have 2 people selling, and then you can actually put your finger on what's working and what's not. I know it's not directly related to what you're talking about,
advice,
but
though.
yeah, not,
Amen.
Don't have only one person doing it.
Reid, last question for you, unless you have any more, Carlos.
No, go for it.
At the end, we're going to give you a second to, if there's any questions we should have asked, you can go on that. But the last question that I want to ask you is, you're 31 right now.
Mm-hmm.
If you could go talk to 24-year-old Reid, what's the coverage? Or you could choose any age, maybe the hardest year at Tactic, or 24-year-old Reid. What advice would you give?
So much. Like, do everything the opposite of what you I'm just kidding. I've made tons of mistakes. Like tons of mistakes. Our most expensive mistake. Anyway, I made a lot of mistakes.
How much money did you spend on your most expensive mistake?
Probably. I shouldn't say this. What if our investors here? No, I'm just kidding. I mean, it's anyway. Probably, my
could have bought a nice car with it.
Multiple
nice cars.
It was there. There's been some expensive mistakes, but it's so hard because you have to experience the mistakes to really be, like if I were to go back and tell myself something, like maybe not having that experience from that mistake would have prevented me from actually getting, anyway. But I think just to more practically answer your question, what do I say? I would say that I would just try and drill in my head that it's okay to fail, and put yourself in don't try and set yourself up for failure. But I think my younger version of myself was so afraid to fail, and I was also so afraid to have other people see me fail that I wouldn't do certain things or I wouldn't apply for certain things. And maybe I'm unique and maybe other people don't have that problem, but I think it's something that's kind of been I've always been afraid of having people see me fail. And the problem with that is I feel like you give up so many experiences, whether you get what you were applying for, whether you succeed in whatever you were trying to do or not, like you miss so many opportunities. And so I would have just tried to like grab my shoulders and be like, go for every, do not do something because you're afraid of what others might think or because you would fail. Because I think that it's experiences that shape you, and good experiences shape you, just like bad experiences also shape you. Experiences shape you. There isn't maybe a good or bad in front of that. And so that would probably be my advice: is don't be afraid to fail, and don't not do something because you're afraid to fail.
When you were talking, my takeaway that I think I would tell my earlier self is to have more concentrated, intentional action, because you've put in so many reps. Like, you've gotten all the learnings and you've been able to succeed because you've put in all the reps, which also meant that you had that many opportunities to miss the shot as well.
Yeah.
So the failure stacked up, but you're also able to make shots.
Was it Michael Jordan? Was it
or Michael Scott?
Wayne Gretzky, yeah. Miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
And anything we should have asked you or that you'd like to share before we wrap?
No, I just want to say thank you guys. I'm big fan of, Court, I've known you for years, big fan of everything that you've done. Truly, Carlos, I'm getting to know you and you're awesome. You're like Court number 2.
Dang it.
That's
not what I'm going
2.0, 2.0. But no, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast. And I just, want to say, for those that don't know Court, I consider what your influence in my life has helped shape me through some of the hardest situations that I've gone through. You probably don't even realize that, but so thank you, and thanks for having me on, Carlos. Thanks for having me on, and I appreciate being here.
We learned a ton.
Thanks, Reid.
That's a wrap.
You've been watching Hello Grow, the world's #1 growth podcast. I'm Cortland Brady.
I'm Carlos Souza. If you've watched this video so far, it means that you like the content that we're putting out and the people we're interviewing.
We're putting together a community of business leaders, entrepreneurs, and sales leaders. You liking, subscribing, and sharing this content helps us reach those that are going on that journey.
If you want to be a part of this community, please subscribe, smash that like button, and turn on those notifications.